Councillor, thank you.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the committee and officers, and welcome to the Lodge and Appeal meeting for the October the 7th, 2020. It seems a long time since we had a meeting in January, but things have changed from then slightly. So, Jason, apologies and substitutes.
Chair, I've not received any apologies.
Thank you very much. We're going to number 2.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Chair. I spoke to Councillor Cruz earlier on. He's got a family illness, and that's the reason he can't come this evening. Sorry, I forgot about that in my own.
Thank you for that, Joe. Thank you. I'll move on to item number 2, and I'll read this because it's slightly changed, I think, from the last time we met. Public participation. Public participation as provided for in the Constitution is suspended temporarily and replaced by an alternative mechanism for the public to bring matters to the council attention. Members of the public will be able to comment on any agenda item or on the matter of the public wider interest, and will be invited to submit their questions and comments around before 12 noon on the day prior to the meeting, and then they make the submissions here or to the committee, which is Derbyshire Dales District Council or the Democratic Services. The committee team will assist any member of the public without access to electronic means by capturing their concerns on the phone, and as such correspondence will be read out at the meeting. The public will not be admitted to the meeting through the virtual means. All meetings proceedings will open to the public, but will be streamed live on YouTube channel when non-exempt items are being considered. Recording of the meeting will also be available after the event on the District Council website. And that's it. Right, we'll move on to item number 3 and the minutes of the last meeting. Anybody remember that far back in January? No? Would somebody like to move? Oh, thank you. George, would you like to move those? Can I have a seconder?
Seconder, yeah. Happy to second that, Tom.
Show of hands, I think you'll do on this one. Yeah. I think it's unanimous. Thank you very much. And again, I will read on the public interest in item number 4. Members are interest. Members are required to declare the existence of natural or Indian interests they may have in subsequent agenda items in accordance with the Council's Code of Conduct. These interests are matters that are made relate to money or that which can be valued in money, affecting the member, his or her partner, extended family, and close friends. Interests that become apparent at a later stage the proceedings may be declared at the time. So ask anybody for any interest?
Yes, I've got an interest in 6 and 7, so I won't speak on that or vote on that.
7 we're doing discussion tonight. It's been withdrawn. Number 7. Councillor Lees?
Yes, Chair. I've got an interest in item 6. I'm on the board of Ashbourne Community Transport, which provides a similar service to this company we're talking about. So I don't want to take part in the voting on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more interest? No? Okay. Right, we'll move on to first item on then item number 5, the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards for licensing and authorities. I think Tim would like to actually have a word on this to begin with.
Thank you, Chair. It's just by way of a general introduction to the meeting, a bit of an apology to members and an apology and explanation to many members of the public who might be watching as well. Members will be aware that we've had one withdrawn report tonight in relation to the proposed item on tuk-tuks, and that you've also received some information after the agenda as well in relation to the annual report. To just explain why that is and to put on record for the public what's happened, In relation to the tuk-tuks, that's mainly because in the end, we thought we could get enough information before you for you to make a sound and reasoned judgment, and that just turned out not to be the case. So I and myself, in consultation with Lee, made the decision that the best thing to do was to withdraw that from the agenda and bring it back at a later date when we have got enough information for you to make a proper decision. So I thought that was worth explaining. I also apologise for the late inclusion of information on the annual report. That's purely down to the other work that Eileen and the team have been doing in relation mainly to supporting businesses through the reopening of COVID and quite a lot of work in relation to making sure that the rules are being complied with in this area. So that's purely an issue for us, and I'd like to apologise for that and explain why that came about. That being the case, I'll hand over to Eileen to introduce the item proper, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this item informs members about the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards for licensing authorities that the DfT have introduced. They've basically published them now as mandatory statutory, well, they are mandatory conditions, which they want councils to consider, revise their policies in accordance with, and implement ASAP, really. It's expected they'll monitor the situation towards the end of January, and obviously if councils don't undertake to do it voluntarily, then there is the possibility that they'd introduce legislation to make councils make these changes if they're required. So as the report explains, Chair, one or two of the, or several of the issues that they've standards that are recommended for change, this council has already undertaken when it's reviewed its own licensing policy in respect of taxis and private hire vehicles. So we feel that although there are many changes required, or many standards in the document, that we have actually got a bit of a head start with them, and we don't foresee too many problems in complying with these standards. So one of the main things that they're recommending is that councils do look at their licensing policy and that they review it and consider interim reviews as well, but also when they're formulating it, the overriding objective must be public safety. So these standards have been introduced really with a view to protecting the public, and especially the vulnerable public. One of the changes, one of the standards that's recommended is that the criminal record checks of anybody who wishes to be a taxi driver or a private hire vehicle driver, or is already a licensed one, that they should all sign up to the Disclosure and Barring Service update service online. What that does is that allows licensing authorities to check their criminal record with their permission, but at any time during the life of the driver license. And as the driver license lasts for 3 years, it's quite important to check this record on an annual basis, as we do. The standard is suggesting that it should be increased to even more frequency of six monthly. So that would be a change to our policy, or a necessary change. Licensee self-reporting is another standard where they expect licence holders to notify the licensing authority if they receive any charge or conviction of any sexual offence, or any offence involving dishonesty or violence, or any motoring offence. And basically our current policy has that requirement anyway, where a driver is expected to let us know. I can't remember the exact number of days, but I think it's probably 10 days of the offence or the conviction happening. They have to let us know. So our policy covers that. Referrals to DBS, that isn't something that we currently do. It hasn't actually arisen, but they're suggesting that there should be a standard whereby if we are informed by a driver that they've been convicted of something, or they're accused of something that's relating to vulnerable people being affected, then we should probably notify the DBS service ourselves. So as I say, that hasn't arisen yet. That would require us to put some mechanism and some process into our procedures to ensure that that sort of thing did happen. So we would report back on something like that. Working with the police is similar, where there needs to be this exchange of information, and obviously with sharing licensing information with other authorities as well, there would need to be some kind of protocol established. Vehicle proprietors, so they may well be people who have a licensed vehicle but aren't going to be driving it themselves. Similarly, an operator doesn't necessarily have to drive a licensed vehicle. It's the standard is suggested that they don't have the enhanced criminal record check that a driver is expected to do, which checks barring lists as well. They're just suggesting that the standard should be for them to have a basic disclosure. So a basic disclosure of criminal record wouldn't show any convictions that were spent, whereas an enhanced one would show all convictions, spent or not. It's suggesting that there should be a multi-agency safeguarding hub, and that licensing authorities should establish or operate a means to facilitate the objectives of sharing the necessary and relevant information. So that's something that we would need to look into. At the moment, we do have a community safety group called the Violence and Alcohol Licensing Group. It's part of the Community Safety Partnership, and we work in the same way in that forum with representatives from the fire and the police, environmental health licensing, and other bodies. And so I imagine a multi-agency safeguarding hub would work in a similar manner. Training decision makers is a standard. I mean, the standards. Well, I suppose actually I should have explained at the beginning the legal reasoning for the standards. Lee Gardner, our legal services manager, will explain that. So I'll just get to the end of these points that are standards that are recommended.
You've gone on mute again, Eileen.
I'm sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. Yeah, I'll just get to the end of these standards that are highlighted, and then if Lee wouldn't mind giving a bit of background to the introduction of these standards, then that might make more sense to members. So training for decision makers is a standard that's required. I mean, that's one obviously which this council has complied with for several years now. It's a mandatory requirement of the council that anybody who sits on this committee does receive training in taxi licensing and other types of licensing as well. It's also they're also requesting that members are well aware of safeguarding issues and child sexual exploitation issues, and I understand that members do receive that training as well as a requirement from the council's own policies. Criminal convictions and rehabilitation. It is an annex to the document which the original document that the DFT provided back in 2010 had a similar annex, and that is one that this council has used as part of its policy in order to determine whether or not certain convictions would warrant an immediate refusal of an application, or a refusal even of an application that had been made by refusal by committee. That has been updated, and there are more issues in there now, more explanation of issues, so that members can interpret really whether or not a particular matter does apply to a conviction that's been reported. Joint authorisation of, one of the recommended standards is joint authorisation of enforcement officers. I mean, that is something that does happen already in Derbyshire, with some councils have signed up to shared enforcement between their authorities, and they do tend to be the sort of bigger councils with the bigger areas and the bigger nighttime economy. So it isn't something that we've looked at in the past, but it is something obviously that we could look at in the future. So they're basically the main standards recommended. And it's just a brief overview of where we are with them, Chair. So, I mean, perhaps if Lee does a bit of background to how these standards came about, I could then continue on with what next.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. This really has come around since the Deregulation Act in 2015. What that did to taxi, and especially the private hire trade, was to say that you didn't have to be licensed in the area that you actually operated. You could get a license from pretty much anywhere in the country, and then you could operate in neighbouring authorities. Now, this was a major issue for my last authority, Milton Keynes, which was a large economic town where they had quite strict standards on vehicles and drivers that they tried to enforce, but then they had drivers from all neighbouring authorities, even as far as Rochdale, working in Milton Keynes. And what it came is the government ended up with a lot of complaints about authorities that had strict driving tests and vehicle licensing requirements, and drivers could then literally pick and choose the authority that had the lowest standards possible, license themselves there, and then work anywhere they wanted. So as a result of that, they've come up with these national statutory guidelines to try and make sure that all authorities at least have a minimum standard for vehicles and drivers. So in order to avoid these issues of authorities saying, well, actually, they're just coming in to our area with substandard vehicles, which we wouldn't allow. You also found that drivers would go to one authority, apply for a license there, get refused, and then just go to the neighbouring authority, get the license, and then work in the area that they originally wanted to. So again, a national level playing field for authorities to work off of was to try and avoid these issues and coming up in future.
Well, thank you for that. Tim, any comments to make? Tim? Any comments? No?
Nothing from me on this one, Chair. I think the point is it's a statutory guidance document that we need to take account of in our policy. We need to do some work to work out how we should do that consistent with our neighbouring authorities, and then come back with a revised policy to you for hopefully your approval.
Okay, thank you, members. Any no questions for Eileen?
Councillor Morley wants to speak, Chairman.
Thank you.
Hello, the screen's gone blank, but I'm assuming you can hear me. I think this is only can you hear me?
Yeah, fine.
Only a positive move forward here, and I'm glad to hear that there are national standards, and I think we've got to be very careful that we do protect our residents. I was a little horrified when I first joined this committee to find out that you could get a licence elsewhere and operate elsewhere, because as we know, there are people who are in the country who perhaps shouldn't be, and who may be offering a taxi service that shouldn't be. So this is only a positive move forward, and I'll wholeheartedly go ahead and move this to go forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other questions for Eileen?
Chair, actually, do you mind if I just jump in there just to confirm that that actually part of the licensing test, you must now prove that you have the right to work before being granted a license in this country. So, if they weren't entitled to work there, then that'd be an issue for the licensing authority to make sure that they do before granting that license.
Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. I had my hand up, but nobody seems to be acknowledging it. Thank you. Thanks, Lee, for just confirming that you do actually have to have the right to work in the UK to get a licence. My question is about the safeguarding training, and I note that there is the training for decision makers that covers child sexual abuse and exploitation. Is that something that's going to be covered in the safeguarding training that members are going to have? We didn't, I think it got cancelled last year for new members, and I know they're trying to rearrange dates for it, but is that something that's going to be covered in that training?
I will expect, sorry, I saw someone else was jumping in there. I fully expect that the safeguarding training will cover everything to do with safeguarding, and that type of issues will be picked up in that training.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah, Councillor Wayne wishes to speak.
Sorry.
Steve, carry on.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much. I'd just like to know, on point 2, on recommendation 2, it says as soon as possible. Could we have a bit of clarity how we would define as soon as possible? Because it's a very broad sort of, is it months, weeks, years, or whatever? That's the first question. The second question relates to whistleblowing. And have the council got in place any effective mechanism to facilitate anybody wanting to confidentially report such informations or breaches? That's the second question. And the third question is CCTV and cameras. I know we live in a little rural backwater, but it's also an area which could be targeted by people from away, because they can do that. Have we considered at all, or what is the view in relation to CCTV in vehicles? Is it relevant or necessary? Thank you very much.
Arlene, would you like to take that?
Yes, Chair, thank you. If I do it in reverse order, starting with the CCTV cameras, I mean, that standard, that national standard is being put in because there are some authorities that have already introduced it as a mandatory requirement, and there are many that haven't. And basically, this council hasn't considered that there have been sufficient problems raised for it to be considered mandatory. It doesn't mean if a driver asks us, can they have CCTV camera installed in their vehicle, that they can't, because they can, as long as they comply with the Information Commissioner's Office's requirements. But we wouldn't insist on it. Lee may well want to talk about the legal side to the introduction of CCTV cameras in licensed vehicles before I move on to the next point.
Thank you, Eileen. This was more an update to assist members. My last authority, they did use CCTV cameras quite a lot in vehicles, and it mainly came as part of a review of a driver's license, especially if there had been a number of complaints about their behaviour in the taxi cab. The licensing authority, in order to allow them to continue to work, would insist that he puts a camera in there that continually recorded. So if there were any future complaints, there was evidence to see whether or not, you know, the driver's claims that it, you know, this was all made up was true. So they would have some evidence. The only issue there comes, and that was the issue that came up, is with data protection, because if you then say they've got to have a camera, but they can't access, you're in fact the data controller. So it comes a bit of a data protection issue at times, but generally we don't insist on it here, because I say the complaints and those sort of issues don't come up. It wouldn't be an issue if they wanted to put it in, but again, if a driver is we have complaints, the driver is reviewed by this committee, that's an option that this committee could insist it's put in the cab.
Can I just come back on that one, Chair, while it's fresh?
Yep.
So it's not something we'd dismiss out of hand, but there basically haven't been the incidents that would warrant it at this time.
Yes, exactly. If there was generally lots of complaints about drivers' behaviour, then that's something we may then consider to be a reasonable requirement to put on as a condition on the licence.
Thank you.
Just on a little side issue as well is that you can only put conditions on a private hire license. The Hackney carriage, you can only do that by amending the bylaw. So being that we do have a joint driver and Hackney carriage, there is some legal issues there that we might need to tweak out. But at the moment, we've not had to look at that at the moment.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So going to the second point then in reverse order, the matter of whistleblowing. I mean, that is a standard, one of the new national standards. So where there are concerns policies are not being applied correctly, it's vital these can be raised, investigated and remedial action taken if necessary. I would like to think we have got effective internal procedures in place so that any staff, whether it be in my team or whether it be across the council, if they felt that application procedures or determining application procedures weren't being applied correctly, that they would be able to raise those issues. And I think Tim will correct me if I'm wrong, but the council itself does have a whistleblowing procedure and policy, which we've all been issued with, and we should all be able to, put our hand on it to refresh our memory of it. But there is a procedure in place for whistleblowing in general terms, so that I would imagine that would be included in this. We can, in our revision of the council's taxi licensing policy, include something in there that lets people know that there is that procedure in place. I don't know if Tim wants to add anything. If he comes
You said what I was going to say, actually, Eileen. I was just going to point out we do have a corporate whistleblowing policy, and that can quite easily, as part of this review, be emphasised around the licensing team.
Sorry.
As Eileen mutters to herself, knocking the computer over. So yeah, we do have that in place.
Thank you, Tim. Any more questions?
I've just got to go back to I'm going back to the first item of Councillor Ray. The one we were hoping to avoid. No, I'm only joking. So recommendation 2, that the council's current taxi and private hire policy and our application procedures and things are reviewed. I mean, it's the statutory guidance that suggests as soon as possible and doesn't give us a date other than it's expecting us to have done that, I would suggest, by the end of January, because that's when it's going to start its monitoring process. And unless we have done that, I don't see that we'll be in a position to be able to say, well, we've got this and this in place, but we haven't got this in place and this is how we're going to do it. So I would say, in answer to your question, that I would expect myself and legal and anybody else that's relevant to have looked at our policies and procedures and our internal application procedures and highlighted any issues that we feel ought to be amended. So I'd say within the next 2 months.
Thank you
very much.
Any more questions? Jason, no?
No, I can't see any more hands up, Chair.
Right, okay, and that'll move on to debate. Okay. Anybody wish to debate it? No?
Can't see any hands up, Chair.
All right, okay, so can I have a proposer and a seconder?
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, yeah.
I think it's already been proposed by Councillor Morley, but I'm happy to second it.
Oh, thank you, Panto. Who's been second?
I'll second it if that's in order, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
And Jason, we'll go to the vote then now.
Yes, Chair. So we need to just take a recorded vote. So we're voting on the recommendations on page 4 of the document pack. Would indicate whether you're for, against, or abstain. Councillor Allison.
4.
Councillor Donnelly.
4.
Councillor Elliott.
4.
Councillor Hill.
4.
Councillor Lees.
4.
Councillor Morley.
4.
Councillor Pawley.
4.
Councillor Statham.
4.
And Councillor Wayne.
4, thank you.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. And we'll move on to item number 6. That is contracting transport for schools of special needs, children and social care, an application for exemption from requirements of council taxi and private hire licence policy. And again, I'll hand over to Eileen.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Ordinarily, if there was public participation permitted at the meeting, then the gentleman who wrote this letter on behalf of the company would have been invited to attend and would have been able to speak in support of his application. So as it is, that he hasn't submitted anything in writing, so we're assuming that he considers that his letter that's appended to this report is sufficient to give members an idea of what it is that this company is asking for. So as my report says, Chair, they're seeking an exemption from some of the council's requirements of the taxi and private hire licensing policy in respect of drivers and in respect of private hire vehicles. Members will be aware that in order for a private hire operator to operate within a district, well, not within a district, but in order for them to operate, the operator, the drivers and the vehicles all need to be licensed by the same authority. So this company is asking for us to license drivers, vehicles and to license an operator space. The operator 24/7 group, as they're called, are a specialist company in providing special educational needs children and young people with transport. And basically they carry out a lot of contracts for county councils across the country. And I understand from Mr. Greenhook, who is to be the area manager in Wirksworth for this company's company business, he has explained to me that at the moment there are 20 such applications of this nature being made to various authorities in the region. I mean, it might be opportune, Chair, at this point for Tim Braun, our director, to explain that there has been a request from our own county council and from the Department of Transport to support an increase in the number of private hire vehicle drivers and vehicles to enable them to fulfil their school and special needs contracts, which I'm sure Tim will be able to explain that better than I have.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Eileen. Actually, Eileen, you've explained most of what I would have explained. We've had a letter from the County Council explaining that they're desperately short of transport for special educational needs passengers, due in part to the requirements of COVID, requiring more separation of people in vehicles, and due in part because councils haven't been undertaking testing and licensing new vehicles because they can't have people in for knowledge tests. They haven't been able to have vehicles in for testing. So we've had that direct from Derbyshire County Council. We've also had the letter from the Department for Transport saying that this is a case across the country and sort of basically pleading with local authorities to get on and license as many as they can, provided they meet the requirements of the policy and law and everything else, of course. So in a way, that this report is supporting those requests and increasing the stock available to the County Council in our area to get these children and young adults to their schools and colleges and so on. And it's something that we think we should be supporting in principle, though obviously all the details of how we support that are what's before you tonight and are for you to decide.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. So just to explain, at the moment, this council's policy is to issue a combined Hackney and private hire driver's badge. So basically, I mean, I can't tell you the history behind that because when I took over taxi licensing in 2009, that was the policy. We issue the combined badge, I suspect, because it makes it easier in terms of a driver being able to have a Hackney carriage and also being able to drive a private hire vehicle if they wanted to. It also means that in terms of enforcement, it made it easier, I believe. A lot of councils issue separate badges. They do issue combined ones, but they can also issue a hackney carriage only badge or a private hire only badge. And some councils issue, I understand, contract only badges. So there would have to be some means of assessing whether or not a driver genuinely met a contract only badge, in that he or she is not going to be doing private hire work, general private hire taxi work that we know it as we know it. In terms of vehicle licenses, as you know, our policy requires our vehicles to be liveried with Derbyshire Dale stickers on the door sign. It's all about public safety. It's about people recognising that the vehicles are either taxis or private hires. Our hackneys have predominantly yellow oval shaped signs on the 2 front doors, and our private hire have predominantly green oval shaped signs on the 2 front doors of a vehicle. We have had exemption requests in the past from that requirement, and obviously the reasons given each one has been treated on its merits. In terms of operators, there's no distinction. An operator, if you're going to run a private hire business, you have to have a private hire operator's license, and you have to have a private hire operator's base. And that base has to be, according to Derbyshire Dales' policy, within the Derbyshire Dales area. Not all councils insist on that, but this council chose to make that stipulation because it does make it easier for enforcement purposes for us to be able to go out and check records, etc., at private hire operators' bases within our district. So in a nutshell, I'm sure members have read the report and read the letter from the company managing director. In a nutshell, what the company is asking for is it's asking for the driver. Sorry, I haven't explained the driver's license. The driver's license that the council issues, the combined one, because it's a combined license. We require anyone who wants a badge to sit the council's knowledge test. Now, members may remember that prior to 2009, this council didn't have a taxi knowledge test, whereas a lot of councils at the time did. It made it extremely easy to get a badge in Derbyshire Dales without a test, because basically, other than a criminal record check and a medical, which all drivers across the country are expected to have, there wasn't anything else to differentiate between whether or not somebody knew the area, whether or not they were able to converse with their passengers. There was no measurement of those issues. So this council chose to introduce a knowledge test back in 2009. The knowledge test is written, it's multiple choice, with the exception of the location section. So we have a highway code section and a section on the council's own policy. Some drivers do drive for more than one council. It is important that they understand what the policy requirements are in the council in which they're driving at a particular time. So the knowledge test was introduced, and it did decrease. There was a massive decrease in the number of taxi licenses that were issued in Derbyshire Dales, because basically we were filtering out people who were fit and proper people to drive taxis and were serious about driving it. So did learn about the council's policy, did learn the locations within the major towns within Derbyshire Dales, and did understand, obviously were able to demonstrate that they understood the highway code and would comply with it. That test has been revised at various times during the last 12 years by the committee. Certain things by running the test came to light. For example, one of the things that we do now with the latest policy change back in 2018 is that we only allow a driver to sit the test, 3 different tests on 3 occasions. And then if they don't pass the 3rd time, then we ask them to go away for 6 months, and then they can apply again. The reason being that there are only an infinite number of questions that you can put into these tests, And you know, if you were to be allowed to sit a test continuously, it would be more luck really than learning that would probably eventually get you to pass. So we believe that in order for somebody who's serious about being a licensed driver with the council, they need to study. They need to study the highway code, which they should know anyway as a driver, but we all need to refresh at times. And they need to study the area. They need to understand where places are in Derbyshire Dales, irrespective really of whether or not they're going to go to Bakewell or Ashbourne or whatever. We tend to do the whole major town issue. And then thirdly, we do need them to understand the policy. We need them to understand when they have to report to us if they've got a speeding ticket, or we need them to understand how they have to report to us if there's a change in their health, and things like that. So that's why the knowledge test was introduced, and it is one of the requirements before you can apply for a driver's badge. That we are very strict on. This request that we have here before us is to change a couple of things really. The first thing it's looking to change is this type of badge. So they're not wanting to have the combined hackney carriage and private hire badge, because obviously that would then give that driver the ability to operate a hackney carriage. And to operate as a normal private hire driver, as in, you know, going airport runs or taking Mrs. Jones to have her hair done or whatever every week. That's not what they're looking to do. That's not what their business model is, and that's not what their application letter suggests they want to do. In fact, it's the opposite. They're suggesting that is exactly what they don't want to do. They don't want to be competition to local trade. So in order to restrict that, it would be necessary to issue a private hire only badge. And in order to restrict it even further, to protect the private hire drivers that we have in Derbyshire Dales, when I say the private hire drivers, I mean the ones with combined badges, but the ones that do actually drive a private hire vehicle only and not a hackney carriage. And we haven't many of those. I think we're probably only talking 17 to 20 of those. But in order to protect them from anyone issued a badge under this relaxation, operating as a regular private hire vehicle, then I would recommend or suggest that we would be able to limit that further by calling it a private hire contract only driver's license. So it would be very, very clear that's not a normal private hire driver's license that we would be granting, and we would be granting it specifically for this purpose. With regard to the vehicles, you'll have read in the letter and in the report. Generally speaking, you'll be aware that the council has a policy age limit on a vehicle that we will license. So originally, back in 2009, the limit introduced was I think it was minimum 4 years, and then take it off at 10 years. That was all 7 years. Sorry, that was all changed back in I think probably around the 2014-15 time, where it was considered better to have just a maximum age. It was considered better just to have a maximum age of vehicle. So any age up to that age, that maximum age, we would license it. So the maximum age the council adopted was 10 years. And you could, in fact, put a license on at 9 years old, just knowing that you would only be allowed to have the vehicle on for 1 year. That 10-year age limit is there. What this company is suggesting is that they don't intend having any vehicles other than probably wheelchair accessible ones, which are more expensive to buy and more expensive to operate. They would only have the vehicles on for a maximum of 6 months or 4,000 miles, whichever came first. In that case, the council's current policy is that vehicles will be licensed for 12 months, and during that 12 months, we generally expect them to have two inspections. So one inspection when the vehicle's put on the road, as a taxi or a private hire vehicle, and then another inspection 6 months later to ensure that the vehicle is still up to is still fit for purpose. Having spoken with the council senior mechanic about brand new vehicles being licensed for this purpose and for this short period of time, it is considered it's considered not necessary for that vehicle to undergo the taxi vehicle inspection. Either the first one or the 6 monthly one, obviously, because the vehicle wouldn't be licensed during 6 months. So that's why one of the recommendations in the report, Chair, is to, if the committee were minded to agree to this exemption in terms of licensing the vehicle, that the cost of those two tests would be refunded, as the council we are only allowed to recover costs for this service if we've incurred those costs. So if we don't inspect the vehicles, then it wouldn't be correct to charge any driver for those vehicles. And I think you'll probably may or may not be aware that during the COVID crisis, we had permission to waive some of the 6 months tests on many of the vehicles, or all of the 6 months tests actually, on the vehicles that weren't operating during COVID. And we refunded the fees because they had already paid for those tests when they renewed their licenses 6 months prior to that. So that's the testing. That explains the testing request, the request for the exemption from testing. Whether it explains it sufficiently or not, I'm not sure, but that's how I understand it. The vehicles that we license all have to be liveried, as I said before. We have the stickers on the door, we have the license plate, we have a license plate on the windscreen inside, a small sticker just to indicate to people that the vehicle is licensed. As I explained, and as I think the company have explained in their letter, they want an exemption from the livery. They transport a lot of vulnerable children and adults, and one of the things about taxis liveried up and I suppose highly labelled is it draws attention to them. Some of the passengers can feel uncomfortable if it's not just an ordinary saloon car. The requirement also, the company itself doesn't want to portray itself as a regular taxi service, so it doesn't want other people to think, well, that's a taxi service, and approach it for any work. So we've done it before with limousines and chauffeur type services where they've put a case to committee to ask for the big door stickers not to be put on the car and for the plate not to be displayed on the back of the vehicle. So it in no way shows any signs of being a licensed vehicle, taxi or private hire. It would only be private hire. We don't give exemptions for hackneys because obviously they drive around and pick people up. So this is slightly different. So private hire. So it would have no indication that it was a licensed vehicle. So that's why they're asking for this exemption. I haven't put in the report, I haven't put in the recommendation about the exemption from the door plates. Recommendation 4, I forgot, I'm afraid, to put in there about the need not to display the plate, but obviously for the plate to be carried in the boot, which is what we have at the moment with some of our executive private hire travel cars. They've had that exemption. They are required to carry the plate in the boot. The same would have to apply to this for it to be the policy consistently applied. So that's the drivers and the vehicles. There are no exemptions to an operator's license. As I say, the operator would have to apply for a full-on license. I think I've explained in the report that an operator's license is normally granted for 5 years. It doesn't have to be. That was a recommendation that legislation came out that suggested we ought to be doing them for 5 years. But there would always, or may always, be a case where an applicant might want it for only 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, etc. Similarly, with the driver's license, it was recommended that licenses were granted for 3 years. But again, there may be good reason not to grant a driver's license for 3 years, maybe to grant it for 1 year if the driver was perhaps considering retiring or something. It's not, and I think Lee will correct me on this, but I mean, you wouldn't grant a lesser license in terms of a driver license because of fit and properness, for want of a better word, because basically if a driver is fit and proper for a license for 1 year, he or she would be fit and proper for a license for 3 years. So I suppose, Chair, what the report is asking for is exemptions to vehicles, with the exception of wheelchair accessible vehicles, where they would have to continue to be tested, because it's presumed from the discussions with the company that those vehicles they would use less, possibly do less mileage with. They would be more expensive to buy and more robust and probably longer lasting for the purpose. And they would obviously be subject to a full double inspection from us. If they stayed on for a whole year, they would have the 2 inspections. I'm not entirely sure I've got anything more to add. I don't know if Lee or Tim have, Chair. I mean, it is really it's almost a committee's views be sought type of report, but obviously to give you a steer, we have, as Tim explained earlier, we have been asked by not only the County Council, but the Department of Transport to consider these types of applications to assist the county councils in providing their school transport and vulnerable transport duties.
Oh, thank you for that, Aline. And nothing to add, Tim, yeah?
Nothing more from me, Chair, on that. I think the report speaks for itself after Aline's explanation.
Lee, nothing to add? Yeah.
Not on the report, Chair, but however, if you can just give me a second, I just want to raise an issue with you, Chair. At the beginning of the meeting, Councillor Lees and Paulie raised an interest in this matter. In the meantime, from what the information I've gathered, I've managed to look them up. They are, in my view, non-pecuniary interests, which means they'd need to declare the description of what the interest is, but that would mean they can take part in the debate and vote.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Right, we'll move to questions then for Eileen. Questions, members?
Chair, I've got hands up from councillors Morley, Paulie and Wayne.
In that order, thank you.
My apologies, I didn't lower my hand. Thank you. No question from me, sorry.
It's Councillor Paulie indicated she wishes to speak next.
Councillor Paulie, can I just ask you, just for clarification, to declare what your non-pecuniary interest was again, just for the record, so we're sure. Thank you.
Yes, I have a close relative who has a business that's involved, but you have advised me it's not a pecuniary interest of mine, so that's the reason I'm declaring a non-pecuniary interest. Right, the question. Shall I ask the question now, Chair? Or 2 questions actually. Chair.
Yeah, carry on. Yeah. Thank you.
This is for Eileen, actually. The County Council have said that they needed to provide drivers for these reasons, and they were putting out contracts, obviously, but going to start probably in September. I expect they all started. Did the County Council explain to you why there was a lack of drivers coming forward from the ones that we've already got working here? because I know that the reason we need more is because they've got to socially distance more, and so you need more cabs. But did they explain to you how many drivers had come forward, and did they contact you to say, could you possibly give us a list so we can contact them and see if they want to do it? Because they might not have been aware of the fact that they needed more drivers because of the COVID restrictions. I wonder if any of that happened.
Yeah, through you, Chair. In short, the answer is no. I wasn't contacted by the County Council to say there was a shortage of drivers for Derbyshire or any other county councils at that time. I was made aware of it through this company making contact with us. Tim did mention earlier that we'd had a letter very recently, a letter from the County Council. I don't know if in that it explained that why they'd got a shortage of drivers. I mean, you're quite right with regard to COVID and social distancing. That's presented why we need an increased number of drivers. But no, I didn't get any detail from the County Council. I don't know whether Tim did himself.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, through you again. We had a letter from the County Council's Economic Development Manager in relation to this. She's supporting a lot of the COVID recovery work up there, which is why it came from her. And no, Councillor Mrs. Pauly, it didn't give any reasons why local drivers weren't coming forward. I think what we can offer, if this meets with the committee approval, is that we can, in responding to that letter, we can put forward the idea that there are many existing drivers, and if they would like us to put their details forward, we're happy to do so.
Thank you for that, Tim. Yes, that will be a very good idea.
Finish question, George.
I have no other questions, but I will come back when we do the debate, Chair, if that's all right.
Any more questions for Eileen?
Councillor Wayne, Chair.
Yeah, keeps waving, yeah. Go on, Steve.
I'm supportive of this in principle, in part of the principle. Well, I'm just looking at it and it seems very centred on one particular company, and it doesn't seem particularly inclusionary to anybody else within the Derbyshire Dales. The recommendations are very defined towards 24/7 limited. What happens if there are other companies or other individuals who wish to avail themselves of the same sort of licence? Are they going to be respected, and are they going to be able to get the same discounts, basically? In recommendation 1, it says in relation to the testing, would anybody else not from 24/7 be able to get that same dispensation? In recommendation 2 about the application fee, would they be able to get the same dispensation? That's one question in relation to being fair, if you know what I mean. The other thing is the knowledge checks. There seems to be a little bit of a, Mr. Mahoney is asking for, in his letter, he's asking for not to do knowledge checks, but at point 5, it's saying that they'll be discounted, but they'll still have to do the knowledge test, the location, exempted from the location section and of the council's knowledge check. So am I to take it that they will still have to do the highway code and the policy, which I personally think are very important for taxi drivers, because we as an organisation are authorising these people, and it's important that we know that they can do the highway code, and we know as an organisation that they know what our policy is. So I'd like a bit of clarity in relation to that. I did speak to Eileen earlier on, and basically I just wonder what other councils are doing, and what dispensation they're giving, and what the company were paying in Uttlesford in Essex. So that's basically my 3 questions, and if you need some clarification, Eileen, I'll explain it again in a bit.
Okay, so recommendation 1 about the waiving the need for the licence for the license, for the private hire vehicles to be tested, it's a request for an exemption from the policy, and all I can say is that if other drivers wanted an exemption, the same exemption from the policy, they would have to request it. I mean, we do exemptions on a case-by-case basis. There's no reason to suggest that if this exemption was granted in respect of brand new vehicles, not that we get a lot of brand new vehicles licensed, but we may well, if they were to suggest that it was to be waived today, then that would have to be something I would suggest. If it was a brand new vehicle, we would have to apply that consistently. It's never arisen before, which is why it's brought before you today, because we haven't ever waived testing. The law, the legal element is that the vehicle has to have some test. I'm not entirely sure. I think that's within the first year, and it can be an MOT, and obviously a brand new car doesn't require an MOT, as I understand it, for 3 years. So that's why our mechanic is of the opinion that it would be, provided that the vehicle isn't going to be licensed for any longer than either 6 months, certainly no longer than that first year, then it would be okay for it not to have its test. The talk about or your question, Councillor Wayne, regarding the reimbursement or whatever, I explained that earlier, that we can't charge for things we don't incur costs for in taxi licensing world. So basically, if we don't test those vehicles, we can't make those charges. That's already been a refund of a 6 monthly test, or a missed an unnecessary missed test, has already been approved by the committee where we set our fees and charges. So there is that provision for us to do that, for us to refund those 2 test fees. What there isn't, and you're quite right, the knowledge test, yes, we also would like all our drivers, whether they're driving school contract only or not, to be able to sit parts 1 and parts 3 of the knowledge test. So in other words, the only part of the knowledge test they would be looking for an exemption from would be the locations. That the reason for that being specifically they're doing the same school run. I mean, as I say, it's a shame they're not here to put their own case, because I feel like I'm in Dragon's Den doing their pitch for them, and I would hate to get it wrong, but as I've understood it in the discussions I've had with them, they license a driver wherever they do it, they license the vehicle in the same authority, and then they ensure that that driver and that vehicle are used for a specific county council contract, so that the customer, the client, the young or the child or the young person, the vulnerable person, they recognise the vehicle and they recognise the driver, and that's what they do, and that vehicle is only used for that contract. This is what I'm told. And I've no reason not to believe that. So I'm now lost as to why I was actually telling you that. So basically, those vehicles go the same route, was what I was getting to. It's a set route. They don't need to know the rest of Derbyshire Dales. They don't probably even need to know much of Derbyshire Dales, because some of these school contracts, whilst they might start in Derbyshire Dales, the facility to which the young person or child is being taken to, either on a daily or a weekly basis or whatever basis, may well be outside of Derbyshire Dales. It may be in another district. You know, some of these special facilities are not necessarily all housed in the same district. It's just that the person needing the transport lives within Derbyshire Dales and Derbyshire County, or within Derbyshire maybe, and Derbyshire County Council has a responsibility to provide that transport. So that's why we don't believe that the location part of the knowledge test is necessary. Now, I have had, I'm not going to lie, I've had requests from drivers in the past who said, but I'm only going to drive private hire, I'm only going to drive to airports. Yes, but you're still going to be picking up people who live in the Derbyshire Dales. You're still going to have to know where they live. And then we've had arguments, well, we can use sat-nav. Well, yes, you can, but what if your sat-nav breaks down? What if you haven't got a signal? You know, you need to know the district. It was a requirement that this committee at the time, back in 2009, was very concerned about, that we were but we were giving badges, licenses to drivers who didn't live in the district, they didn't live in the county in some cases, and they didn't really demonstrate a proper local knowledge, and that was why the knowledge test was introduced. So that's why anybody who has requested not to sit the knowledge test location section has been told in the past, no, I'm sorry, this is the council's policy, the knowledge test has got 3 parts, and if you have a combined badge, you are going to be able to do private hire or Hackney. Whether you do or not is up to you, but you are going to be licensed for that purpose, and therefore you do need to know the council's area. I think possibly my recommendation, I'm not sure which one it is, number 5, the one that suggests that we should charge less for a knowledge test if it only is made up of 2 parts rather than 3 parts. May or may not be palatable. It may mean that the reason we looked at it was because the test would be shorter. So therefore, again, as I said earlier, any costs we incur, we are allowed to claim back. Any costs we don't incur, we're not allowed to claim back. So if we're going to sit in a knowledge test for half an hour, it would be wrong really to charge the driver what we would normally charge any other applicant for an hour's test. That was my reasoning behind it. You may or may not agree with it. I am a bit lost now, Councillor Wayne, as to what your other questions were.
I think you've made a sterling job of them so far.
Okay.
I just wondered where the other one was, what have other authorities done?
Yeah.
Because one thing I'm just a little bit concerned about is that are we saying that these people will turn up with a vehicle and we're taking it on face value without having a check made of the vehicle? Or is it going to go for a check, the brand new vehicle? Because if that vehicle was to have some catastrophic failure on a point that would have been checked by our organisation, how do we stand legally if we have decided that we're not going to check them through?
Well, I'll let Lee answer the legal side of it, but with regard to the first part of your question, it is only a recommendation. I mean, if members wanted the vehicle to be inspected, I mean, because it's requiring an exemption, or it's requesting an exemption from the need to put signage on and the need to put plates on, there isn't really any need for that vehicle to go to the depot. If we send the vehicle to the depot for a cursory look over or whatever, then we would have to introduce some form of charge for a test. Legally, I'll let Lee answer our liability.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair, I believe that our liability would be too remote. In effect, that there's still, it is the responsibility of the owner of the vehicle and the driver to make sure their vehicle is roadworthy when they get in their car and put it on the road. For us to say that it's like anything else, would you hold the person who inspected your car for an MOT if you crashed 2 days later? You know, you and damaged someone else, you know, and someone else was injured, they would sue you from that. So I don't think that the council could be held liable.
Thank you.
Just come in there as well, Chair. If I could, sorry, I interrupted, but the law and practice in taxi licensing is clear that a vehicle over 3 years of age has to be tested at the council's testing facility, the depot in our case, but it doesn't have to be tested prior to that, to reaching the age of 3. So legally speaking, we're able to do this. It is the opinion of our chief mechanic, who is ex-forces and very firm in his opinions on these matters, that he would find nothing wrong with 99% of cars that are brand new. He said at the worst, there might be a light bulb out or something like that. So his view is that it's a perfectly reasonable request, given the particular circumstances of this application, in that the vehicles are going to be brand new when licensed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to Councillor Wayne's question about other authorities, No, is the answer. I haven't checked with the company or with any other authorities what they're doing in respect of these requests that I'm told have been made to them, because those councils will have their own charging policies, and they'll have their own policies in terms of vehicles. I mean, it might be that they wouldn't agree to any of the relaxations. It might be that they would agree to them all. And that I do know that Uttlesford, the one that is down there near Stansted or wherever, I do know that they haven't required the drivers to sit any kind of knowledge test at all, but they have required them to carry out some kind of driving assessment, which has included highway code, and questions and things like that. And I think they've had to go out and do a proper driven assessment as well, I presume, to check for possibly things like wheelchair accessible, wheelchair loading, that sort of thing. So some of these drivers that I understand live in Derbyshire Dales or Derbyshire as a whole, who are going to be the drivers that this company would like to license with Derbyshire Dales, because they're local, in inverted commas, they have already been licensed by Uttlesford Council, so that this company could fulfil some of the contracts for Derbyshire County Council. And the vehicles are also licensed by the same authority. And I understand that those drivers then will surrender those badges and those licenses if they get granted leave to apply here. And I've forgotten why I'm telling you that now. I think it was because of the fact they have been tested, but tested in a different way, basically. So it's difficult. It's difficult to make comparisons with other councils. I mean, even with the 7 or 8 other councils within Derbyshire itself, the taxi licensing queries that we raise very regularly, we're all doing things slightly differently, and that's just the nature of taxi licensing. I'm afraid it's evolved. It's not like alcohol licensing or gambling licensing, where the policy, where the legislation is fairly current and it's very prescribed. Taxi licensing may well have been prescribed back in 1847, but there's been a lot of interpretation and misinterpretation since. I hope that helps.
Thank
You're
you.
on mute, Councillor Donnelly.
Any more questions for Eileen?
There's Councillor Allison, Chair.
Thank you very much. Jacqueline.
Thank you. When I started reading the report, I thought there's a lot of exemptions being asked for here, and it was almost like because of the kind of the niche operation that they're undertaking here, it was like it probably needed a whole new policy. And I wondered whether that's something that you've maybe considered to put in place. And going back to Councillor Wayne's point about consistency in this, a new policy would underpin that consistency. So I just wondered if that's something that might be considered.
Yes, through you, Chair, I would agree. It would ensure consistency, and it would introduce a new type of vehicle license and a new type of driver license. I'm going to let Tim, as my director, explain to you how. I mean, we weren't going to have it to set a precedent, to be honest, because we believe every case should be dealt with on its merits, and that's in the current policy. But again, if you made a policy change, that would remedy that. So I'll hand over to Tim.
Sorry, yeah, Councillor Allison, you're absolutely right on this, and it's part of a conversation that Eileen and I had in drafting this report. My view is, what's happened is this is the first request of this type that we've received. And what we think is, in the current circumstances, with the request from Department for Transport and from the County Council, we need to swiftly determine this particular application and move on with it. My view is that it is the same as yours, that actually we should think about revising our policy if this is going to be an area of work that is going to grow in this area. And I think that's something that takes a little bit longer to consider, along with our colleagues in the rest of Derbyshire and perhaps wider than that as well. We didn't feel that we'd be able to get this application to committee in time to be of any use this educational year. So we thought we needed to do that. But yeah, I think what we can happily say is that we will consider this in a policy context, along with the other changes that you considered in the earlier report, and bring that back to committee as soon as we can, which kind of echoes the phraseology that Councillor Wayne questioned earlier on. I suspect that we'll do this particular bit after we've done the bit about the new statutory standards, but I do agree with you that it needs considering in a policy context.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Any more questions? No?
I can't see any, Chair.
Thank you, Jason. We'll now move on to debate. Thank you.
Councillor Pauly wishes to speak.
Yes, hello, thank you for that. I welcome Tim's suggestion that we do something to try to make sure that taxi businesses in this area get a first look in when it comes to business of this sort. I've had a report which worried me, that very early on in the COVID lockdown situation, it was extremely difficult. Well, in fact, it was impossible to get onto the County Council website to try to get registered, even to put forward a tender for these contracts. You couldn't do it online or get in touch with them. The County Council main phone line wasn't being answered. There was no way of emailing either. And this went on for several months, so that a local company couldn't actually register even to try to put forward a tender. And then you hear that somebody from outside of this area has a contract and is asking for lots of exemptions. Now, I've no worries about a company coming along if it's the contract system is working. But I suspect because COVID was going on and there were so few people in the county, this might have been the case. Now, I can't verify that, obviously, because it's all in the past and it's something that's happened and is done with. But if we do have a new policy put in place, I would hope that we could include in that some kind of way of working to make sure that there is an equality in the process at county that ties in with our wishes for employment in Derbyshire Dales, because we talk all the time about how we want to improve employment here, and if through some kind of glitch our companies don't get the chance, our drivers don't get the same chances, then I would hope there was some way that we could put in our policies we avoid that. That's really what I would like to say. I think we have to guard the jobs in Derbyshire Dales. It's so important. It is of such major importance that we need to have that included in any policy that we do bring forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Joyce. Any other questions? Jason?
Councillor Wayne has got his hand up, Chair.
Carry on, Steve.
I haven't got my hand up at all, and it's not shown on. I don't know. It was shown as down on my system. Oh, sorry.
Okay, Jason.
Councillor Lees has got his hand up, Chair.
Stuart?
Yes, Chair. Yeah, as I say, I've got an interest in Ashburn Community Transport that does a lot of work for the County Council, unknown to Derbyshire Dales as such, through the High Peaks, right through to Staffordshire, the Moorlands, everywhere. And they have actually got driving contracts with the county that drivers are still not at work from the COVID due to the fact that daycare centres, etc., are not open. And, you know, these drivers that still sat at home with nothing to do. It's just my point from our perspective of Ashburn Community Transport.
Thank you, Stuart. Any more questions, Jason? Any more reports in the debate?
I can't see any, Chair.
Okay, in that case, then I'll go for the vote. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Needs, I put it to the members for approval. Could I have somebody move it?
Chair, could I just interrupt? Could we amend? I don't know if Jason picked up on it, but could we amend that that recommendation number
number 4, isn't it?
Number 4, yes.
Number 4.
So to include the license plate as well as the stickers.
Thank you, Eileen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, can I have somebody to move it then?
I'll move it.
Okay, Alison. Can I find a seconder?
I'll second it, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, right, Jason, we'll go for the vote then.
Right, Chair. So we're voting on the recommendation that's on page 9 of the document pack on item 6 with the amended condition 4 in relation to the license plate. If you could indicate whether you're for, against, or abstain. Councillor Allison.
For.
Councillor Donnelly.
Oh.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Hill.
For.
Councillor Lees.
Abstain.
Councillor Morley.
For.
Councillor Pawley.
Abstain.
Councillor Statham.
Sorry, 4.
And Councillor Wayne.
Abstain.
Yeah, that's 6 votes for and 3 abstentions.
Okay. Now move on to get the page. Item 8. Licensing Act and Gambling Act 2005 Annual Progress Report. You're taking this on, Tim?
No, Chair. Eileen will introduce this and just run through the activity that her team's undertaken in the last financial year.
I apologise, Eileen. You're taking it.
Yes, so this is the annual report on the Licensing Act and Gambling Act activities that the licensing team deals with on a year-by-year basis. Basically, this report would normally get reported to the first licensing committee full meeting of the civic year. So it would have gone to the July committee, but obviously due to the COVID lockdown, that committee was cancelled. So I'm bringing it to you today. It provides a summary of the work relating specifically to alcohol and entertainment licensing and gambling. As you'll know from previous years, there are an awful lot more licensed premises for the sale of alcohol and provision of regulated entertainment than there are for gambling activities. So there's similar sort of information that you receive year on year. The number of personal licenses and the number of premises licenses that we have that are current at the moment, which are not renewable, so have built up, are detailed in paragraph 1.2. Of the 500 premises licenses and club premises certificates that we're maintaining those numbers, probably 430, 24-30 are alcohol licensed. The other ones are like village halls and community premises and schools that are just licensed for the purpose of regulated entertainment. The 1,300-ish personal licenses that have been granted since day one, which was about the 25th of November back in 2005, they're not renewable anymore. So consequently, those personal licenses will remain in force, and hopefully we'll never have to contact everybody. Although it's a legal requirement that they tell us when they do move house, they have to tell the authority where they had their original license. People don't realise that, and they move, and we never hear from them again. Moving on, the licensing service plan, which the council will have considered. One of the actions in that is that we carry out at least 20 licensing awareness visits during the financial year. And these can be to public houses or restaurants or cafes that are licensed, or they can be to gambling premises. As I say, we don't have very many of those, but we still have to carry out inspections every so often, or scrap metal sites. So that is their areas where we and our partners, such as the police, feel that planned project visits are important. Other types of licensing have their own inspection regime or don't require inspection once a license has been granted. So since the end of the last financial year, so since April this year, in the overall scheme of things, there has been a decrease in the number of alcohol and entertainment and gambling license applications received. I mean, that's basically as a result of coronavirus pandemic and the lockdown. Ordinarily, during that period, we would get an awful lot of applications for temporary event notices. Now, in the document that was circulated late, and I do apologise for that, the statistical information document, you'll see that the number of temporary event notices and late temporary event notices totaled in 2019-20. If you add them together, it's roughly, I'm not very good at maths, but it's about 630. So that's 630 processed for outdoor events and one-off events that would have been occurring during last year and this year. To this year, you'll see in the report, I've recalled that so far since the 1st of April, in the first 6-month period, we've probably processed something in the region of 30 to 40 temporary event notices. And the reason that they've been applied for is not necessarily to have outdoor events, but the occasional premises that hadn't got an off-sales license, wasn't allowed to sell for delivery and that sort of thing. They gave temporary event notices to allow themselves to do that. Working with partners, obviously we do continue to work with partners. We work with trading standards and the police when we do test purchase operations for underage sales of alcohol. And we did 2 or 3 of those operations last year. It's not likely that we're going to be able to repeat those this year. We may be able to get 1 or 2 in, but we're certainly not going to get the number in that we got in last year. Similarly, with our own inspections of premises, whilst we will still aim to meet our 20 or more than 20 target, it will be difficult. We are starting to go back out to do compliance visits in premises. Our risk assessments are all in place to do those. And we're now ready to engage again with the trade that are trading to see whether or not we can go and do a compliance visit. We'll take the opportunity when we do those to see if there's anything, any advice additional to what they've already received from our colleagues in environmental health in terms of diversifying their food and drink business. And any help or assistance that they might need with additional applications. I think I've mentioned in the report, and I will have mentioned it to committee at the time, the last committee, perhaps not the licensing committee, but I think it was an emergency committee about pavement licensing. And the pavement licensing, I'm not going to go into that this evening because it's hoped that in January we'll be able to present you with a much more detailed report of how that's gone. At the moment, it is still a work in progress. We are still encouraging premises in our major towns and one or two not so major towns where we know that people in the past have put out tables and chairs and furniture on the pavement, and we're drawing their attention to the requirement, and we're at the waiting stage to see what applications will be made. And we will be working with our colleagues at Derbyshire County Council in the Highways Department if we don't receive applications from premises where it's a given that they would require to be licensed. If they don't want to be licensed by us, we can't make them. We don't have that enforcement power, but the County Council does have enforcement powers in respect of removing obstructions from the highway. And as I say, if we present a more detailed report to you in January, we'll be able to explain how that's gone. I'm not going to talk to you about the financial detail because that's not my forte. I'm hoping Tim will be able to explain the financial accounting over the last 3 years and the comparisons and whether we're on target for a full cost recovery of the service. And not really anything much else to say, Chair, about the report. So, I mean, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. It is basically to be noted and to keep you all in the loop that we are still carrying out the same activities in these two areas of gambling and alcohol and entertainment licensing that we have done since 2005 and 2007, when both acts came in a couple of years after they were passed as law. So unless Lee or Tim have anything to add, then I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
No? Okay. Any questions for Eileen?
Councillor Pauly, Chair.
Joyce, if you'd like to speak.
Yeah, so would you like me to propose it as well? That we accept it as well? Can you hear me, Tom?
Sorry?
Would you like me to propose acceptance of the recommendations as well?
That'd be wonderful, Joyce. Be wonderful.
Thank you. My question, I've got two. I think obviously now one's going to be for Tim and the first one for Eileen. Just out of interest, we see a lot more of the small establishments popping up for the consumption of alcohol. And I'm looking at the new premises licensing figure and the surrendered premises license figure. Could you tell me, do you know if the surrendered ones tend to be the bigger premises that would have employed several people, whereas the ones that are new premises licensing, are they now tending to be for smaller establishments? That's the first question. And then the question on the financial direct costs in 3.2. Why we had an actual figure of 2019-20 of 107,000, whereas the original budget was 88,000. I wondered what happened there, why that difference. Those are the two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Through you then. I forgot what the first question was already. Oh, right, yes. The new premises. Yes, I would agree. Most of the applications for the new premises recently have been from small cafes that want to become licensed cafes and that similar type establishments. So farm shops, that sort of thing. They might want to do off sales rather than on sales. Some do both. They are mainly small ones, I would agree, and unfortunately it's almost reflected in the surrendered license number as well, in that it's generally speaking somebody will go to all the trouble of getting a premises license at a fair expense, and then they find that in the smaller establishments, other than the odd lady or gentleman who likes to lunch, there isn't a lot of call for alcohol, and to pay the annual fee, which is roughly the same price that they paid for the license, it doesn't become viable. So we do see some licenses that will be granted and cancelled in the same year, which, you know, is quite sad, but that is the way it goes. They don't close, the business doesn't close, it continues to do its restaurant or cafe, but just without the alcohol. I mean, there's always the option, of course, for bring your own, which, you know, is a much more, I suppose it's a cheaper version, a cheaper option for the customer. It's in terms of the licensing objectives and things like that, it's probably a lesser preferred option. Bring your own, you know, it can lead to a lot more drinking, I suppose. At least a licensed premises, it's quite, I suppose it's restrictive by cost, if nothing else. So not a lot of people want to go down the road of bring your own as well, because they don't really want, you know, they don't really want loud and noisy environment when they're not used to it, and they prefer not to have the alcohol at all in those cases. So that's the pattern that's probably evolved over the last couple of years. Prior to that, you'd very rarely get a large or a premises owned by a large company that had several. You'd very rarely get those surrendering their license, because basically they'd transfer it to somebody else. If the current tenant or person was moving from that premises, the premises would stay a pub or stay a large restaurant. They'd just transfer it. They wouldn't surrender it. Surrender generally means it's not really worth continuing to trade, or maybe somebody's retired from business.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Any more questions for Eileen?
I'll just pick up on Councillor Pawley's second question, if I may, Chair, which was about the costs of the service. The major cost in Eileen's service, like so many council services, is the cost of people paying their wages. And what we failed to do when we set the original budget was to predict that one of Eileen's team would become pregnant during the year and we'd need to provide maternity cover. So whilst that doesn't cover every single bit, that's the main reason for the increase in costs, is because happily, I suppose, one of Eileen's staff did become pregnant, have a baby. She's now back at work, which is lovely. But it did mean we had to provide cover during the year 1920.
Thank you to you both.
Thank you. Any more questions for Eileen?
Councillor Morley, Chair.
Michelle?
Hello, thank you, Chair. It's not so much a question as a thanks to Eileen, Tim and their team, and the update on your colleague's baby, which is lovely. Thank you very much for all the information that you provided. When I first came onto this committee, I didn't realise, I suppose, that there was so much to learn and understand, and ongoing changes in licences. So thank you very much for the information, and I certainly feel far, far more well informed than I did some 16, 17 months ago. And thank you for the updates, they're very much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Michelle, I've been 99 years and I'm still learning.
Oh, that's all right then. I'm happy to second as well.
Moved it, yeah?
Joyce moved it, yeah. I'm happy to second.
Okay, Jason, I think we're ready for the vote.
Yes, I've got no other hands raised, Chair, so we'll move on to the vote. So we're voting on the recommendations on page 19 of the document pack. So recommendations 1 and 2. If you could indicate whether you're for, against, or abstain. Councillor Allison.
For.
Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Hill.
For.
Councillor Lees.
For.
Councillor Morley.
For.
Councillor Pawley.
For.
Councillor Statham.
For.
Councillor Wayne.
For.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Anyway, that I think concludes the meeting. May I thank everybody, all our members and our officers for such a very good meeting, and I'm quite happy to close the meeting. And I would suggest that you have a good night's sleep tonight because it'll be a long night tomorrow night.
Oh,
Thank you very much indeed.
bye.
Cheers.
Bye. Thanks for your input. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
See you
Chair.
now. Bye.